Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Sturgill Simpson, titled Metamodern Sounds in Country Music. So here's a friendly tip to all you new aspiring music critics out there. If you're going to start doing a review series like me and want to do a year-end list of the best albums of the year, as of course you're going to want to do, it's a very good idea to keep an eye on the genre charts and fellow critics to track albums that you may have missed earlier in the year. Because, trust me on this, you do not want to discover midway through the next year that you might have missed a record that could have had a chance to make that year-end list, but you just might have started midway through the year and you just might have missed the album entirely. Now, granted, it's damn near impossible to hear every single album that gets some manner of critical acclaim, especially because even aggregators like Metacritic, they're not perfect, especially when you have albums that are somewhat far removed from the mainstream. And nowhere is this truer than in country music, especially from the independent scene. And thus, when I put out my year-end list, my top albums of 2013, I got a number of questions from hardcore country music fans why High Top Mountain, the critically acclaimed debut album from Sturgill Simpson, did not make my list. Well, the truth of the matter there is that I just hadn't had a chance to listen through that album when I made my list, a mistake that I knew had to be rectified as soon as possible. But now that I've heard High Top Mountain, would it have made my year-end list? Well, it'll be damn close, that's for sure. This album is great across the board, with fantastic raw texture in the instrumentation and Simpson's thick accent, and the songwriting brings the same rich flavor all throughout the table. Most intriguing to me was that through the hazy guitar tones, the album was very much rooted in the psychedelic country tradition, an outgrowth of the hippie movement throughout the late 60s and early 70s. A distinctive oddity in a typically conservative genre, Simpson's socially conscious lyrics about crime, weed, and unemployment, they rang all too true in crossing outlaw energy with psychedelic texture, creating a very unique album, especially in modern country, that easily deserved all the critical acclaim that it did get. And thus, it wasn't surprising that country music critics, myself included, were extremely interested in Sturgill Simpson's follow-up record, Metamodern Sounds in Country Music, a record that promised to be even weirder and more experimental than his last album, something that only enthused me even more. And thus, determined not to miss him twice, I took a look at that album. How'd it turn out? Well, it's awesome. Arguably even better than High Top Mountain, simply because this might be the best fusion of psychedelic rock and country music I've heard in years. Not just the blending of the genre through instrumentation and production, but lyrically as well. And since I'm a known sucker for psychedelic rock, this album nearly had me right out of the gate doing everything that I love to see in this genre and crossing it with a sharp, witty, and yet emotionally informed songwriting Sturgill Simpson. And while I wouldn't quite say that this album is perfect, nothing really is, it's damn close to being not just a stellar country album, but one of the best albums you will have the chance to hear this year, bar none. I'm serious, it's getting a recommendation right out of the gate. Go get this album. But to elaborate further, let's begin with the first major change from High Top Mountain, the instrumentation and production. There's always been a certain amount of rich texture in Simpson's instrumentation, but there's palpable, unapologetic grime and dirt on this album. Through every strum of the acoustic instruments, the gentle drumming, the fuzzy yet deft touch on the electric guitar, and Simpson's very rich and passionate vocals echoing throughout the mix, just lo-fi enough to perfectly imitate that of an older microphone. With all of that, the reedy organ tones are just a bonus to reinforce that late 60s sound. And yet, unlike most music of that time, Simpson's also smart enough to add enough subtle moments of modernization to show that he's making the best of the full mix and not just a throwback. It makes the album feel simultaneously both out of its own time and yet very distinctly modern. An interpretation of what psychedelic country would sound like in the modern era, and yet showing every rich, organic, almost weathered moment. And like the best psychedelic country, Sturgill Simpson isn't afraid to both drift into the acid high songs like Turtles All the Way Down and Living the Dream before diving straight into the acid freakout on the most modern sounding track, In Ain't All Flowers, with the inverted feedback, ominous bass, smoky electric guitar tone, and Sturgill Simpson's howls that echo and punctuate his choruses. And yet, Just like Sun Structures by Temples, the other phenomenal psychedelic album thus far out this year, Simpson's melody lines are as tight and controlled as ever. Meticulously plucked guitar lines woven neatly together, regardless of the haze that reflects more natural talent than any sort of construction. The interplay between the different guitars is damn close to impeccable. And while there are only a few scattered virtuoso guitar moments, Simpson makes the country familiarity of its hooks work incredibly well in succinct, well-positioned moments. It definitely helps matters that Simpson avoids most of the bloated moments that tend to clog up psychedelic rock and tends to keep his songs fairly short, with the only real exception being the extended darkness of It Ain't All Flowers. And honestly, that song was so good that it didn't bother me anyways. And you know what? The more that can be said about Simpson's delivery in his vocals, the better. His thick Kentucky accent is admittedly a little bit tough to get used to and fully parse out, but his tones are smoother and easier to articulate here, with only brief moments of backing vocals to punctuate some of the rowdier tracks. Now, what really impressed me the most here was his emotional range. Through songs of existential musings, relationship strife, and harkening back to his past, there's real character and unique personality bleeding through on every single track, and it does wonders to making Simpson a compelling performer. Now granted, the fact that he actually steps up to the microphone with effortless poise really does help matters significantly, but you know what, I can't front, I just love his vocals here. And yet, like all the truly great country albums, it comes down to lyrics and themes. And you know what, at first glance, there doesn't really seem to be a unifying theme of the album until you look deeper. The album begins with an ambling desire to just get high, and from there flits across all manner of leftward-leaning traditional country songs, with plenty more drugs along the way. And from there we get self-deprecating outlaw tracks in Life of Sin, A Little Light Within, and Long White Line, the last of which being a country standard from Charlie Moore and Bill Napier, meditations on finding one's passion and living the dream, and on unnecessary self-doubt and voices, and a very sincere declaration of flawed yet very honest love in the When in Rome cover, The Promise. And then you have a wistful look back at the past with the bonus track Preamble. And you know what, of course, the lyricism is genuinely clever and perfectly framed, with Simpson unafraid to show every single side of himself, flaws be damned. And yet, throughout the glorious moments of this album, full of painfully real portraits of Sturgill Simpson's dreams and demons, I just kept wondering what deeper themes ran through this record outside of a damn near perfect reinvention of the acid-soaked edges of outlaw country's history. You know what, in fact, you could probably make the argument that the album's theme was the need for country to keep pushing the boundaries and experimenting, to go deeper into the passions, dreams, and darkness that define the best songwriting in the genre, and just push it as far as you can go. Now, the usage of the word metamodern in the album's title is very, very telling and honestly quite important, because that entire philosophy is in exploring the varied mindset between the complete sincerity in Simpson's approach to psychedelic outlaw country and the shades of richer, very knowing nuance in which he frames every single song. There's a lot of contradictions that begin to crop up here when you look further. He begins the album exploring and glorifying mind-expanding jugs, and then ending it by showing the possible nightmare by going in too deep. He then preaches the gospel of living one's passions, and then he shows the self-doubt and the cost of living such a life. He makes an unflinching promise of love and fidelity that is rooted in apologies and pleas for the woman just give him the slightest chance. They don't even really have a defined relationship here, and yet he still goes for it. Hell, he thanks God for his life of sin with an earnest yet knowing smile. All of that knowing sincerity, that too honest nuance, really that could be described as the most important theme of this record. To push the boundaries of country music, we shouldn't just expand the sound, but bring real truth to the writing as well, because honestly, that's the best way that you can encapsulate life, as well as we know it. So, okay, if you can't tell by now, I love this album. I love its confessional honesty and the nuance to paint every single picture of every single song as vividly human. I love the rich, organic sound in the blend between psychedelia and outlaw country. And you know what? I love that Sturgill Simpson had the balls and the cojones to push that sound of country forward with intellect, tact, and texture. In short, this record is one of the best of the year, bar none, earns a 9 out of 10 from me, and definitely my highest possible recommendation. Guys, if you love country, psychedelic rock, or you want simply just music with the talent, intellect, and heart to back it up, you need to hear this album. You need to hear it ASAP. This is the sort of music that will do more for country music in the long run as a genre than anything Florida Georgia Line or Luke Bryan or anything the rest from the Nashville songwriting machine will release this year. No jokes here, being completely serious. You all need to get Metamodern Sounds in Country Music by Sturgill Simpson because it is amazing. I promise you will not regret it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Not often I get to give such glowing reviews, but wow, this album was awesome. I really hope you all check it out because it is great. If there's any other albums you'd like me to take a listen to, or if there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.